Welcome to the Art Institute of Chicago's 23rd Annual Reflections Festival. I'm Lucas Livingston, Assistant Director of Accessibility and Lifelong Learning. Reflections is the day we come together to celebrate the critical role that art plays in our lives. We celebrate learning, discovery, creativity, and expression. We celebrate community among our many voices. We celebrate accessibility and wellness, and we celebrate ourselves. I ask at this moment if you would right now make sure your electronic devices are turned off and silenced out of respect for those around you and our speakers. And we also ask that you please keep your cell phones silenced and refraining from using them in the museum galleries. We're pleased also to offer assistive listening devices, which are available in every auditorium today, and live streaming captions for today's lectures, and also our lecture at 12 o'clock and 1 o'clock in Fullerton Hall. You can access the captions from your smartphone or tablet simply by visiting the link on screen, arctic.edu/captions. I just ask that you please consider turning down the brightness of your screen to benefit those around you. We'd also love to have your feedback on this new feature and all aspects of today. So please take a moment to return your pink evaluation form to any of the volunteers wearing the yellow ribbons. Your feedback's the best way we can continue to improve your experience. On behalf of the Art Institute of Chicago, I'd like to extend our sincere gratitude to our friends Buddy Mayer and Dr. Debra Weese-Mayer of the Hulda B and Maurice L. Rothschild Foundation. Thanks to their generous support, this 23-year-old experiment and the Art Insights Community Outreach Program have been possible. And with that, it's my extreme pleasure to welcome to the podium Dr. Debra Weese-Mayer, President of the Hulda B and Maurice L. Rothschild Foundation. Thank you.
Lucas? Just this.
The right arrow.
Good morning, especially to those of you who braved the rain, not to mention the elevator, from what I understand. We're delighted that you can be here. Well, for those of you who may not recognize her, this is Aunt Hulda B. Rothschild, on her 100th birthday, which was some time ago. Does anyone have a vivid memory of a key elder who inspired you on your life journey? I suspect if you take a moment to reflect, there's at least one person and probably several. Well, Hulda Bloom Rothschild, born in 1878, right here in Chicago, was that elder for our beloved Dr. Robert Nathan Mayer. Hulda was a female leader who in 1941, when she was just 63 years old, took over her husband's successful business after his premature passing. Perhaps you remember the Maurice L. Rothschild stores? Familiar, right? Especially when Maurice had his staff drop hundreds of overcoats from the roof to individuals during the Depression. Well, Hulda went on to grow the Rothschild brand over the next 30 years of her professional life. She loved art and travel, but most of all, she loved her great-nephew, little Robbie Mayer, who was also born in Chicago, but in 1949, so more than 70 years difference between them. And that love, inspiration, and dedication was mutual. Hulda and Rob had many beautiful family memories, including this photo taken at one of Rob's many graduations, where Hulda always had a visible presence. Hulda was a devoted philanthropist who lived to the venerable age of 102. Kind of amazing, isn't it? And she actually passed away in 1980, so even more amazing. So in anticipation of her passing, Aunt Hulda designated Rob to ensure her legacy. So at the ripe age of 31 years, Dr. Rob Mayer became the founding president of the Hulda B and Maurice L. Rothschild Foundation, a position he honored simultaneous to his full-time employment at a Fortune 100 company and while raising our 3 children. Over the next 35 years, Rob developed the Rothschild Foundation such that Hulda's designated charities always had an elder focus, today being a great example, and always reflecting his love and dedication to his great aunt. He grew the foundation into the only national charity to focus on elder care reform and built care environment, passionately building a designation of excellence program to identify and further develop meritorious nursing homes. And with Rob's all too premature passing, he left a gleaming legacy initiated by Hulda and Maurice and now carried forward under our leadership. Today, as we all appreciate the generosity of the Hulda B and Maurice L. Rothschild Foundation, I ask that you share a moment of appreciation for its founder and visionary, Weese-Mayer, and for all those inspiring elders who guided you on your own life journey. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Beautiful words about some very beautiful people. Our keynote speaker today is Jonathan Tavares. Jonathan is an early modern decorative art and arms and armor scholar with a PhD from Bard Graduate Center. He received his training in arms and armor at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, beginning in 2006 as a collections assistant and later as a Jane and Mary Whitney Curatorial Fellow. From 2008 to 2011, Jonathan served as an adjunct lecturer leading courses on design history at the Rhode Island School of Design. He began at the Art Institute in 2013 as a postdoctoral Mellon Rice Curatorial Fellow, and in January 2016 was made Associate Curator of Arms and Armor. And this March, he recently opened the new Arms and Armor galleries at the Art Institute. Recently, he has published on early modern design and print culture in Arms and Armor, contributing an article on the erotic ornament of the 17th century hunting rifle in Prints and Translations by Ashgate. And it's my pleasure to have Jonathan with us today to share the Arms and Armor in the Art Institute. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucas. It's such a joy to speak to you today, and I promise you, you won't see any erotic hunting rifles up on the screen. Alas, not in our collection, but other things perhaps. Anyway, welcome here today. It's a pleasure to speak to you about our Arms and Armor collection. So my presentation is multifold. The first section will be to discuss the past of our Arms and Armor collection. Some of you may have seen it in the past, and we'll flash up some slides of where it's been. So where it's been, and where it is now. And we'll give you an introduction to the new galleries, which all of you, I hope all of you, will be getting to see the new galleries where there will be a person there to explain our figure on horseback, which I will also give you a preview of. And then finally, I have a volunteer that I'm going to have a very much hands-on surprise for you all. I'll just keep it at that and see where we go. All right. So the Arms and Armor collection here at the at the Art Institute of Chicago was begun by this gentleman here, George F. Harding Jr. Mr. Harding is part of what made this city windy, I often tell people. He was a politician, he was a city controller, then he was treasurer for Cook County, and then he was state senator for Illinois. That goes hand in hand with his other profession, which was real estate. He was a real estate magnate here in Chicago. And that together, real estate, politics, equals, in his mind anyway, feudal lord. And so befitting that, he created this castle addition to his otherwise normal home/mansion, as you can see here on Lake Park Avenue. And it was the addition was built in 1927. So that's Mr. Harding. He was quite a remarkable man. He was obsessed as a child with stories of Sir Walter Scott like Ivanhoe, Arthur, things like that. And so this really had an impact in his adult life for sure. He was also an aviator. Already in the early 1930s, he had his own plane, which he learned how to fly along with his pilot. And he took many trips to Europe for buying armor, amongst many other things. So what did it look like on the inside? Like that. Every child's dream, I like to think anyway. It was my dream. So this was Mr. Harding's home. Already during his life, he opened it up as a museum, and it was known as the Castle, or Harding's Castle. And this you can see here, just the year after he died in 1939. He left it as a museum in his death, and it was open to the public until 1960, at which time it befell this fate. In 1962 is when the wrecking ball came. So why did this happen? Well, it was slated for urban renewal, and so right now it's a park area, unfortunately. But this put the collection in limbo. It was crated up, and they tried to find a home for it, the Board of Trustees at the time, and they found a home in the Curator Library here on Randolph and South Michigan Avenue. Unfortunately, that too was taken down. The library was pulled down, and that happened around the late 1970s, 78, 79. And there again, the collection was in limbo. To put not too fine a point about it, the collection was sort of being mismanaged to some degree. There was an investigation by the state's attorney, and finally, by court settlement, the collection in 1982 came to the Art Institute. And so here you can see it, all the crates being opened up. And it was this man here, Dr. Leonid Tarasuk, who was a consultant curator from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, who made sense of the whole collection. He put it together, he put the objects, the armors back together, and he was given about 6 months to come up with this display by the court order. Some of you might remember, how many remember this display? Oh, fantastic, great, I'm among friends. I never got to see this display, in fact, growing up in Rhode Island, but it is absolutely interesting to see how well they did with this long hall, which is now where the Southeast Asian Alsdorf collection is shown. The storage for the collection was directly behind the casework at the time, and at this time, it was about 20% of the collection on view. Just under 1,000 objects, in fact, make up the collection. So, from about 2007 until about roughly a year and a half to 2 years ago, the collection remained mostly in storage. There was a small 7% display in the same spot where the new wing is, what we call the Morton Wing, and now the Deering Galleries. And so, as you heard from Lucas, this March we opened our new galleries. Essentially, I was very grateful to be brought in to put together the new display as you see it today. And this is the first entrance rotunda. There's actually a dome up in here that ushers you into the Arms and Armor space. It's an antechamber. It's sort of the concept that we had with our designer was this guard chamber, if you will, where in each one of these cases there's a guard, a princely guard's equipment on display, sentinels before you come into the audience hall where you see the two equestrian figures. One of the major objects in this entry hall you can see here is this massive two-handed sword. Besides this figure, which was the bodyguard of the Duke of Brunswick in northern Germany around the end of the 16th century, so about the 1570s and 80s. I love to play a game with people in the galleries. I ask them, how heavy do you think this sword is? Again, you can see how massive it is. And I get a lot of answers like 50 pounds, 100 pounds. It actually only weighs 7.5 pounds. It's a thin piece of steel, and it has a wooden grip. In fact, these things are meant to be used not just for display and pomp and ceremony to process the Duke in a major parade or to the tournament grounds or through a city, but they could have been used to hold people back and to break spearheads and things like that when in battle. So they had to function. They couldn't be that terribly heavy. This particular piece is actually dated. It says Anno 1573. That's the year that it was made. And then it says number 53. or 52, I think it is. That's 52 out of 290 that were made. So can you imagine 290 men processing with these two-handed swords? It must have been quite the vision. Certainly a statement of wealth and power that was made around that time. Then, as soon as you come into the audience hall, and this is, I believe, one of the major stops for you all today, you'll be greeted by this man-at-arms, what looks like a knight on horseback, rearing up in the heat of battle. We actually have portrayed a specific moment, perhaps, when heavy cavalry comes and charges against infantry. And you can see this is this moment where he's used his lance, this long wooden it's like a spear, but actually is meant specifically for use on horseback. And that's the initial attack and charge. That is broken. And he drops it, and then he draws his sword, and he tries to rush out of this quagmire of fallen horse and men and pikemen and everything in disarray. So we've caught this figure in the heat of battle, as it were. We've even had the sculptor, this brilliant gentleman who's in New York, Mr. David Hayes, who sculpted the horse. And it's not a stuffed horse, I promise. It's made out of synthetic materials, except for the mane and the tail are real horsehair. The rest of it is all synthetic and fiberglass and things like that. And you see we've even spread dirt on the front hooves to make it look like it's really in battle. This is not actually a noble knight, it would surprise you to know, but he's a man-at-arms. He's a professional soldier. This is portraying a period around 1520 where professional soldiers were on the rise, and they would have been essentially mercenaries paid for their work. And the armor that he wears is not of the highest degree, but actually it's armor off the peg. It would have been sold small, medium, and large. And you see he has no armor, or he doesn't appear to have any armor for the lower legs. That was because that was the most skillful and hardest thing to make. It had to be form-fitting exactly to your legs, otherwise it would be uncomfortable. You can't do that off the peg. So the way around that is to have a tailor stitch these linen hose for you with tiny little metal plates in between two layers of linen. So it actually is armored. It's just a cheaper version. We brought in a group of costumers from the School of Historical Dress in London to do this completely by hand. All the costume that you see on this horse and the next horse and two figures in the back that I'm going to show you are modern, but they're using all authentic period materials in following surviving examples for the pattern. So this is our second horse. So if that was your business suit, this is your party suit. And here you can see here, we reproduce these beautiful trappings of velvet and wool and handmade tassels and handmade silver gilt fringe or trim. All of this was following a pattern that myself and the costumers did. We went to Castle Ambras in Innsbruck in Austria, where we examined the remaining examples. There's only about 12 remaining examples of horse trappings from the middle of the 16th century. This armor actually dates from Italy about 1560, as you can see here. So we were very cautious and careful. I remember the German casework designers who were coming in and putting all the caseworks, and they saw me putting the feathers in the tail, and he looked at me very sternly and said, "No." I said, "Yes," and then I showed him a actually beautifully illustrated book of a tournament from Germany, his native Dresden, and I showed him all these tails being put into the feathers, and he was like, "Oh, I guess so." You wouldn't think so, but absolutely. This was all about pomp and display and wealth. And the feathers also could suggest your family heritage, your coat of arms, your colors, your allegiances, or maybe even the persona that you're putting on for that event. A lot of these trappings were only made for that one day. So it's really what we call conspicuous consumption, right? They produce all this great wealth and expense just for use for one day, and maybe they would recycle it somewhat for another engagement. Certainly the armor was reused again and again. And this armor actually tells a fascinating story about that, which I'll get into. So this is what the joust looked like, in particular in Rome in 1560, the period of our armor. Here, by the way, is the Vatican. This is a Sistine Chapel right there. So they had jousts in the Vatican right there. And you can see all their feathers and the beautiful trappings on all the horses. So this armor, as I said, was Italian, about 1560. It has all these reinforcing plates for the left side because that is the side that you receive your blows. Now, when you take these extra double plates off, these double thickness plates, you find the bolts that hold it all together. And the bolts tell a very interesting story. And the story is that this armor has been readjusted not once, not twice, but 3 times to fit different sized people. You see there's a hole vacant here, there, and there's another vacant hole there, and here. The bolt has been moved that many times. And that's so that the outer plate can adjust to the different size and height of that person's, where their vision slit is and all that. It's also been, you see there's a little hinge on the side here, it's been let out. Just a tiny bit. But let's not hold that against this gentleman because, in fact, he's still about a 22, 23 waist, so he's pretty narrow. Certainly I wouldn't fit in there. Anyway, but I do fit in these. That's another story. Now, these 2 armors are engaged in a type of tournament called foot combat at the barriers. This is a picture before we had our barrier. Now we do. You'll see it in place in the new installation. But you see the very fancy, beautiful feathers. This is Renaissance peacocking, as I call it. And the costume that you see is completely produced by this school of historical dress. These truncos, as they're called, are actually made from a pattern taken from the etched decoration on the armor itself. 37 people embroidered these by hand over a 3-month period. And they were teaching courses on Renaissance embroidery, and that's how we were able to have this done. And we're very grateful for that. So this kind of sport was really an exciting one. You can see as it's portrayed here in 1627 by the artist Jacques Callot, in this particular instance in France. And here you have them hitting each other with blunted pikes or spears, and you can see them gathered up here. The object of this sport was essentially to hit each other in the head or the body. No hits below the belt, that's why there's no armor below. You were to break the spear on each other and score points. And as soon as you broke a spear, a page handed you another one. They were meant to splinter very easily. They were kiln-dried pine, so it didn't take a lot of force to do that. Now, we like to think of this kind of tournament, other than a joust, this is on foot, as the beginnings of sort of theatrical displays like opera. So the noblemen would process into the arena. It was indoors as well as outdoors. They would have large floats drawn in. They'd have horns blaring, drums beating. They would have pyrotechnics going off. It was really quite an occasion. Sometimes there were cantatas being sung and composed for this. And you can see all to the delight of the guests and all the women in their large farthingales you can see in the stands. And that's who they were, of course, intending to impress. So it was really quite the occasion. We wanted to reproduce the feathers to create this atmosphere, this theatrics that was so important in the time. And so you can see we use portraits like this to reproduce the crest above the helmet and also to get an idea of what the feather arrangements were. Obviously, they were ostrich feathers, and then these top feathers were egret feathers. We couldn't bring in real egrets because of Teddy Roosevelt's Migratory Bird Act, but we were able to fake those. They're the only part that is sort of not real, unfortunately, but there you have. Lots of detail. Now, what's really fascinating about these feathers is there were actually professionals who made design drawings to present to the noblemen so that they could approve what they wanted their feathers to look like for the occasion. You can see our feathers, though 3 feet tall, are actually tame. They could be another 2 to 3 feet taller than that still. And you can see that it almost dwarfs the helmet. And this has this beautiful paper mache, probably, dragon off of it. We have other designs that show that sometimes sparklers and streamers were put in it. So you had to have a page set you on fire. So you would come in and it would all be going off in smoke. That we didn't reproduce for obvious reasons, but there you go. Now, other major highlights I'd like to point out in our new installation is this armor. This is really one of the crown jewels of our collection. It's an armor that was made in the royal workshops of Greenwich in England during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, around 1588 and into 1589. So what happened in England in 1589? Well, this was the threat of the Spanish invasion, the Spanish Armada. So some of Elizabeth's courtiers got a royal warrant, which they had to pay for, to have the royal armorers make them an armor to face this threat. And as beautiful as this armor is, all gilt and etched, it was indeed intended for war. It weighs about 35 pounds altogether. That probably seems heavy to you, but actually our own armed forces today that are fighting in Afghanistan, they wear outer tactical vests that weigh 32 pounds. So armor today weighs much the same as armor then, which is kind of surprising. And yes, it was very articulate, but I'll show that later. So this was the design drawing for this armor, most likely, and that survives. So the master armorer, Jacob Halder of Greenwich, kept a book of all his major clients that says, My Lord Compton. And so we think our armor was likely actually this one for the Earl of Compton. And you can see all the missing pieces, like the saddles and the thigh pieces and the helmet. And this actually is what we believe to be a portrait miniature from 1590 of the Earl of Compton, and we believe, again, in this armor. If you notice, there's probably a color difference, right? Our armor is bright white, as the one in the portrait miniature is blue. Well, actually, we found evidence that this armor was indeed at one time blue, and that's a heat treatment process to the steel. We actually embarked upon a major project with this armor. We wanted to see what it was like to produce it from hand, from scratch. And so we got a generous donation from Mr. Daniel Manugian and Richard Gradkowski, great donors, to support the making of this armor. We brought in 3 blacksmiths, 1 armorer, a chemical historian to reproduce the etching recipe from the 16th century, and an etcher, and then also a fire gilder in Germany who gilded the piece. We're still in process. The breastplate is completed, and just to take you through it, this is the remnants of the little bit of bluing. This is a rivet on the side of the arm, and it has a little dimple on the side of it where that bluing survived, whereas the rest of it's been rubbed off over time, having been over-cleaned. So that's just a little tiny, tiny hint of what it was. This is the process. This is our blacksmith who produced the steel from scratch, from iron ore. He smelted it in a furnace. He smelted 250 pounds of steel to make a 35-pound armor. That's how much you lose in the process of refining. And this is the smelted sort of cake-like material that comes out of the furnace. And you can see it here after it cools down. That has to be further refined into a billet. And so it's kneaded like dough, multiple folds, and then spread out to become a plate. And this is what will become the breastplate. You can see it sketched out on the floor here, the shape that it needs to become. So the blacksmiths used sledgehammers and trip hammers to very time-consumingly draw the plate out from the center. And so the center was left a little bit heavier and thicker than the sides for various reasons. Here is it in the raw, the breastplate, as it's being formed, and he's following patterns taken from the original. And this is almost complete. He's begun to polish it. And it has 2 layers, an outer and an inner layer, which is what our breastplate originally had. This is after it's polished, and this is the finished one. This is just 2 months ago, so we're still in process, but this is what our breastplate looked original, that glorious blue color, if you can imagine, absolutely stunning. And it's only a few ounces off of the original, so we're really proud of that. And this is all going to be on a Nova documentary. PBS Nova has followed this as a documentary, and it will air on October 4th at 9 o'clock on Channel 11, so set your calendars. Anyway, other parts of the installation I invite you to take a look is our gun cabinet. This is a shot that was taken before we finished our displays. And you can see it doesn't have signs yet, but it will soon that say, please open. You'll see that there's handlebars in the back room behind the armor displays. And I invite you to open up these drawers and look at more firearms and what we can get on display. The concept behind this space is to be like a Baroque or an 18th century gun cabinet, filled with hunting materials and guns and swords. It's to be a more intimate environment and give you that experience, essentially. This is an authentic gun cabinet from the period, from a castle in Erbach in Odenwald in Germany. You can see there's racks and racks of guns and deer heads. Now, we couldn't put racks of guns in our display for obvious reasons, but we could do the drawers, so you could still get that kind of intimate experience. And presiding over the gun cabinet is this portrait of King Philip IV of Spain, workshop of Velázquez with his hunting hound and his fowling piece for shooting birds and his hunting grounds behind him. So we put this full-length portrait in there to bring you immediately into the theme of the hunt in the court, which the hunting was so important too. And then we have highlights like this gun. This is one of my favorite guns. It dates from about 1660, 1664. It was made for the Holy Roman Emperor, the Habsburg Emperor, Leopold I, and it's beautifully carved. And you can see here, there's actually a portrait of the emperor himself and his courtiers on one side, and on the other side, this is really fun. This is taken from a print that was 100 years old. This is the hunter being spit roasted alive by the rabbits. A little tongue-in-cheek, right? This is the world turned upside down. And it says, you know, it so happened we rabbits avenged hunter who skinned and ate us alive with these measures. And it says that in a German verse running down the side of the barrel. And you can see the hounds are not forgotten. They're also boiling in these cauldrons. So anyway, fun little gun. So with that, I will invite you all to enjoy these new galleries, be immersed in the period, be immersed in the drama that is Arms and Armor. And next, we have a little demonstration for you. So I'll ask my assistant, my squire for the day, Lucas, to come up, and also Miss Leslie Fitzpatrick, who is our assistant curator of decorative arts, who's going to be our model. Okay, here we go. So, I know, it's like you didn't think you were having a magic show, did you? So Leslie, if you have your gloves. So we always put gloves on when we handle the armor because you have a lot of oils and salts in your fingers, and of course that will cause rust on the pieces. All our armors are coated with wax to prevent rust, but we always use gloves as a precaution. Okay, so the first layer when you're being armed in your armor is to have a padded arming doublet. It's very essential to wear that first, and so we'll put that on first. This is not a period piece, of course. This is a modern doublet reproduction. There's only about 2 that survive from the period, in fact. And they're very grimy. I'm just going to close in one place. Mm-hmm. There we go. Great. The next, we have our armor. The armor I'm going to put on Leslie is a period. It dates from about 1610. It's probably Italian. There were major production centers throughout Europe, but Italy and Germany were the major centers, to be sure. So the first piece that goes on is the gorget, which is the neck defense. I also call it the neck guillotine, but don't worry. So you'll get out eventually. So it opens up on a hinge and pins like that, and you can see internal leathers that help make it move around you. So we're trying to capture all your hair. Yep. That's great. Perfect. Good. Yeah. Next, we have the breast and back plate, known together as a unit called a cuirass. Lucas will take the back plate, and I will take the breast. And, yep, come on over.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. And it goes onto a mushroom stud like so.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Make sure these leathers are in place. Yep, very good. Thank you so much, Lucas. And then raise your arms up. And on the sides, we have a hinged hasp that closes like so with a hook. There we go.
It was the first time for everything.
And the other side. Oops. Bunching up, sorry. There we go. Good. How's that?
It's a little snug, but we're good.
And next we have the arms. Now these are my favorite part, actually, funny enough. But they're kind of like a lobster, aren't they? And you can see on the inside how they articulate with leathers all on the inside and sliding rivets. And a turner, which goes back and around like that. So, the leathers on this armor are all replaced. That's what happens over time. They rot away. Very rarely does leather survive. Yep, through. So that's why we use this armor for display. I mean for demonstration purposes. And then we just do the buckle up on what's called the pauldron, which is the shoulder defense.
You should tell them about the small armor and how you put it on Andy's.
Oh, yeah. There we go. And again. Great job. There we go. And pull this down.
Okay.
And this is tension fit. It's not unlike your vacuum cleaner attachments, right, with the little stud pin. Happened in armor first. So it's just tension fit, and there, it snaps in. The little pin goes through the hole. There you go. And then, just because I think you are the right size for this armor, we have the legs, which again are very flexible because they're on sliding rivets and on these internal leathers. So you ready for this?
I'm ready.
Okay. And it's on a mushroom stud. There we go. Oops. Don't move. There we go. Nope, that's all right. There we go. There we go. Not bad.
Fantastic.
Not bad.
Ooh,
You're
made for me.
You're about 1.5 inches too tall, but that's okay. There we go. Yep. Yeah. Actually, we'll get that. We'll leave that. It'll be fine. You can move around. It's fine. And last but not least, the helmet. You ready for this? Do you get claustrophobic at all?
Yep.
Okay, well, try to hold it in.
Oh,
So
I can just lift it.
What's missing from the helmet is the original lining that would have been on the inside. So it's not quite as comfortable as that would have been in the period. But we are not asking you to go to battle today. So I think we'll be okay. Okay, there we go. Ready? Mm-hmm. There we go. And that's not it. Now, one always needs to show your colors, and of course this is the Art Institute's colors, red and white, and so it shows your allegiances and such. The term for feathers for the helmet, by the way, is panache. It's the period term, so when you do something with panache, you're putting feathers on here. Yeah, there we go. Now, time to demonstrate some movement. You can stand just right there. You fine? Mm-hmm. Yeah? We're going to pull this down. Oh. There we go. So, you didn't know what you were volunteering for. So, now I get all my aggressions out on you, Leslie. The sword here is a period sword. It's from a little bit earlier. And I'm just going to discuss with you a little bit, and I'll give you a little bit of air. There we go. The upper visor goes up for more air, but protects the front of your face. How this whole thing works to protect you, right? So with the helmet in place, you see this ship-like prow. That's meant to glance the sword blow or the lance or the spear from side to side. You'll also notice that there's breathing holes on this side. Turn around. There you go. But nothing on that side. That's because you want to strengthen your left side. That's the side that receives blows while you give blows with your right. Everybody was forced to be right-handed in this time, especially if you're of this station in society. So they don't want to weaken the left side by having breathing holes, so you can only breathe on your right side. But no, that's all right. So that's that. Now I'm just going to put this down for a moment. You have a raised comb here. That's if you get hit in the head, it absorbs the shock of the sword and also moves it right to left. So that's like a shock absorption device. There we go. Just put this up for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You see the pauldrons are very rounded in form. That's so that the blows will just glance off. And when she clinches up her arm, there's no way of getting the sword in there. Now open your arms up. You see there's these areas that are exposed. This is where mail used to be, right? Mail is armor made of interlocking links, chain. We don't call it chain mail, though. The proper term is mail. And this would have been sewn on into your inner garment, like so. And that would prevent sword cuts from going into your elbow and such. Yeah. And then we have the breastplate itself, right? This medial ridge there, which is also meant for glancing blows to right to left. And often, sometimes you find like a paunch, like what we call the peascod belly on there. That's both fashionable and intended to help glance blows away. You can date a breastplate by the decade, depending on the shape of it in the front. Armor is fashion. It's meant to reference the clothes that you wear underneath. So without that further ado, why don't you go take a round, make a nice, be free to move your arms around and show people how it works. Do some of this, yeah, absolutely. So people can do somersaults in armor, cartwheels in armor. I'm not dance in armor. Fantastic. So anyway, that's all I have for you today. I just wanted you to see that absolutely armor is an amazing material. Unfortunately, when you come to a museum, you don't get to see the full artistry of it. We have touch screens that show you how some of these things move. It's not meant to be experienced static in a case like a piece of sculpture. It's supposed to move for you. It's meant to fit the human body. And so I just want to give you that little extra experience so you can appreciate them. So thank you so much. And thank you, Sir Leslie. Sure. So teenagers could go into battle. and you could have been up till age 40, 50, sometimes even a little older than that, depending on your lifespan. There is this question that I often get, were people smaller in the period? And the answer to that is not necessarily. On average, anthropologists say in the 16th century, people could have been about 2 inches shorter. Our average height is about 5'9" today. Maybe theirs was 5'6", 5'7". But there were plenty of 6-foot-tall people. Henry VIII was King of England, was 6 foot. So was Henry II of France. It was not uncommon. This armor, judging by the way it fits Leslie, this person was probably a few inches shorter. I think this might have been a training armor for a teenager. It's very light, but it's hard to say. You'll see in our display we also have an armor for a 2 to 3-year-old. It only weighs 1 pound, and it was meant to show the little toddler at court as the heir apparent. You know, we like to dress people, little people, as adults. Well, they like to do that too. So that's what that is. Yep. This armor weighs very little. I think this armor altogether, complete, is about 14 to 20 pounds. It's very light. It's not necessarily a battle armor. It might be just for display, or as I say, sort of like a training armor.
The helmet was the only thing that was even a little bit sort of intrusive.
Yeah, the helmet, it's
natural.
a truth that the helmet is a little bit claustrophobic. Your peripheral vision is not very great in the helmet, which is why you have that upper visor to raise. Thank you. Lucas, arms up. In this instance, there was not armor for the lower legs, and that's because of the style armor it is. It's from about 1610 when they started to do away with bothering to have armor on the lower legs. Why? Because of firearms were very much on the advent, and they understood that if their horse fell below them, they wanted to be able to run very rapidly. So they were beginning to just wear leather boots instead. And you will see plenty of armors in there that do have armor from head to toe, but that was not necessarily always the case. Armors were not, to make them complete, always head to toe. Some were, some weren't. And then we have the gorget. Ready?
Ready.
Freedom coming to your way. There we go. And you know what's interesting too is armor is sort of like a radiator. So while there is light and is very flexible, one truth for sure is that in the heat of a summer, you will bake in there. And as I took the armor off of Leslie, I can feel her body heat radiating on the steel. So yeah, so that's what happens.
And also if I had one that was made for me or fit a little bit better, but no, so, it was tough to see.
Yeah, vision is impaired with the visor on completely, for sure. But you have to get used to it, and you would pull your visor down only in that very moment that you're engaged in battle. And when you were a little bit freer in battle, and you could just keep your lower visor for a lower protection, but have your eyes more open for vision, and that's how that helmet was designed. And some people actually forego the closed helmet just for an open helmet and took the risk of getting hit in the face because they preferred to have more vision. Yeah. But as does our own military today. Yeah. Thank you so much, Leslie. Thank you all.
Wow. Thanks so much, Jonathan, and thank you, Leslie. Thanks for the enthusiasm and sharing your expertise. This was amazing. And the conversation can continue in the museum galleries. You'll note in the booklet that there are volunteer presenters leading short discussions about selected works of art, not only in the medieval and Renaissance galleries, but also throughout the museum today until 2:30. In quick closing, I also want to give a very special thanks to the many individuals who are volunteering their time at the Art Institute today and throughout the year. And without their passion and dedication, the Art Institute could not be the international leader in art enrichment for older members of our community and people with disabilities. And with that, I thank you for your participation today and have a wonderful reflections. Thank you.